So welcome everybody. My name is Jenna Nilo. I am the Director of Marketing and Outreach with Illinois Digital Educators Alliance. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon for this very timely presentation on the presidential elections and the great debate. So learning to discern media literacy and the presidential election. Carol and Susan, I'm going to turn things over to them in just a minute. They are with the Museum of Broadcast Communication, and we're so happy to have them join us and really take you guys through this amazing resource, this curriculum about presidential election debates. And then we hope to have some very cool things coming up in the near future with them as well, some opportunities for some virtual field trips for your students. So more to come on that, not even today, more to come because we just brainstormed on this yesterday. But as we work out the details, I will be sending you information on that as well. So we're excited about that. Before I turn things over to Carol and Susan, I am going to just go over a few typical housekeeping items. As you know, with Zoom, everybody's doing it now, but if you don't mind keeping yourself muted during this presentation so that they have the floor and there's no dogs, as I said, barking in the background, I'm going to do the same thing here in just a minute. If you don't mind keeping your video off, then it'll just kind of put the spotlight on the two of them as they go through the presentation. With that being said, though, we do welcome interaction throughout today's presentation. We encourage it. We love it. So go ahead and use that chat feature in Zoom. If you don't know where it is, it's at the bottom of your screen. There's a little chat bubble. Click that. That'll open up your chat window. And then ask any questions there. And between the three of us, we'll be monitoring those throughout and making sure that we get questions answered either during the presentation, if they're appropriate to the presentation, or later on. But Carol and Susan will talk about that in just a minute as well. If you are looking for Illinois educators, if you're looking for your PDH, I will post that in the chat window at the end as well. If you're not from Illinois and you just want a certificate of completion, we can send that to you as well. So there will be a link to a Google form at the end of today's session. I will put it in the chat window with information on how you go ahead and get that. And last but not least, I am recording today's session. So just so you know, that is recording. Tomorrow, I will send out an email to everybody who registered for the session with the recording, with the copy of the chat file, and then also any resources or anything else that, the presentation, obviously, and then any resources or anything else that Carol and Susan want to share as well. So keep an eye out for that email tomorrow. And that's all for me. So without further ado, I am going to mute myself, turn myself off, but I am going to turn things over to Carol and Susan. So thank you so much. Welcome. And we're looking forward to it.
Well, thank you so much for having us. We're really excited to be here on behalf of the Museum of Broadcast Communication. All right, let's see if this will move forward. There we go. And one of the things that we are focusing on is sort of giving you the background as to how this came about, what the goals are of the materials that we have offered to schools, and where we're going to go from here with this website. And Susie and I will be bouncing back and forth off of each other. So if you have questions related to what we're presenting on, please, again, shoot them into the chat. And and then we will also have a 15-minute window, hopefully, unless we talk way too much, which we might be inclined to do, at the end to also field some of the questions as well. All right, so introduction. So I am Carol Summerfield. I actually run a museum, as well as I am on the board for the Museum of Broadcast Communication. I've got a extensive background in marketing and education. And most of my marketing career was spent on education and nonprofits. So I've been on the board at the Museum of Broadcast Communication, which you'll see the acronym MBC all over this, for a couple years now, and have worked extensively with Susy Schultz, both in her previous jobs and as well as working with her on the MBC materials. So with that, I will turn it over to Susy so she can introduce herself.
I am very, very lucky that Carol takes me with her wherever she goes. I'm happy to always be her partner in crime. My name is Susy Schultz. That's a much better picture of me. You should keep looking at that instead of looking at me in real time. And I'm really, really, really excited to be here. This curriculum and this idea of how to really present politics in a fractious time to students so that we can actually be apolitical or get them thinking about it and use media literacy is the culmination of just almost decades of work that I've been doing and that Carol has been doing. I've been a journalist for more than years, and I've also been a teacher. I've taught at, I had my high school certification for teaching, but I did forego that to go into journalism, and I've taught at Medill, Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism, as well as Columbia College and Roosevelt University. And I have also written curriculum for adults in communication, as well as for a med school in communications, how to actually communicate what is wrong with your patient in a new med school in Texas. So this, and I've covered politics as well, but I've always spent most of my time figuring out that real conundrum of how do we use language, how do we frame issues so that we can get the ideas across and we can have a back and forth and an understanding. So our hope today is not only that we show you this curriculum, but that you also kind of jump in with us. And if there are things that you see later on, we want to hear from you. We want to see how to keep this updated as we go along in the fall. We don't want it to be static. We really, really want to support you in how you're teaching. So we're going to use the DING method. There we go. I want to tell you a little bit about the Museum of Broadcast Communication. I started there in April following Carol, who was on the board, and she recruited me, which was great. And we really believe that the museum, while it has a history of really much more nostalgia, its future is building equity, ensuring democracy, and preserving history. We want to make the museum relevant to young people. We want to make the broadcast industry something that they can think about critically, because it is so much a part of our lives. So how do we look at it in a way where it doesn't turn them off by giving them ideas, but it actually we find a way to use it to engage them so that they can be critical thinkers and they can be literate in media. So as we move ahead, let me tell you how we formed this curriculum around the whole idea that when you look at the media, and we looked at about 100 years in the media, radio to television to digital, online streaming, social media, etc. When you think about that, and when you think that radio, which is celebrating 100 years, so it's only 100 years old, and television came in not even more than 20 years later, and then the way we have iterated in the course of history has just been much faster, right? When the media change or the delivery changes, it's always responding to the next thing, to technology. And as it does that, and it jumps at the next opportunity to evolve, it disrupts the rest of us. It disrupts all of the things that we are, that we have learned to do or that have become second nature. Think about it. Those with a radio had to get a television all of a sudden. Those with a television, all of a sudden it was black and white, and then it was color, and then it was big screen, then it was digital, then it was everything. And now you have to be on a computer. And what are the apps that you have? For Pete's sake, you better be keeping up, right? And as we saw this, looked at this, when you're looking at politics, and especially the higher level presidential politics, it only comes up every 4 years, right? It seems to us as though they're all melding together and it's just one big election. I understand that, but really it only comes up 4 years. So we thought, looking at this, we came up with points of disruption. When has it really shown itself to disrupt the political process? During the great debates, during the debates. I wanted to highlight that since that's part of the campaign. And Carol, you take it away now.
Right. So one of the things that we're really cognizant of as we look at how this focuses on students, and this is students anywhere from 6th grade through 12th grade, this could extend into college, is helping them understand in what is the most interactive form of media, helping to build their sense of civic engagement and their understanding of what participatory engagement looks like. This was a really interesting campaign. This photograph ran about 2 years ago. And one of the things that nonprofits started to realize is that people would think that giving a thumbs up or commenting on something on social media was their form of participating, and that they weren't engaging beyond that, that somehow that seemed like making noise within the media space was enough for them. And so this campaign was liking is not enough. And one of the things that we want to do is we look at sort of where teachers can take our curriculum and really engage students beyond just media literacy, is looking at what civic engagement really looks like and teaching them about what real interactivity looks like with your elected officials, well beyond the guise of a campaign and voting, because quite frankly, most of the students we're going to be touching don't have the ability to vote, and yet they still are empowered to be able to communicate back and forth. One of my favorite stories, and it's a woman that Susie and I knew really well, Barbara Rose, who passed away a couple of years ago, talked about when she first got involved in election politics and working with her elected officials. She would just did letter writing campaigns, and finally she's riding in an elevator up with one of the elected officials in Indiana, who turns around and is like, "Oh my God, you're Barbara Rose. You're not even old enough to vote. I hear from you all the time." And it is training students that their voices are there. And you can see it more and more, particularly after some of the events of the last couple of years, that they're learning what that power looks like. But this is a way to help ground them in sort of the historical aspects of it, and also helping them channel recognizing what's really impactful and what is just noise within social media. All right. So where this idea began, this is a reiteration of something that the museum actually had several years ago. But one of the things that we wanted to do was breathe real life into it, looking at it through a really modern lens. You know, and one of the most interesting things, and I am a statistic nerd, right? So these are Pew Research statistics from several different sources, but it is 92% of people self-report that they get their news every day. Now, self-reporting has its own, what we refer to as me search, which is my personal experience, therefore is real. That might be a high number, but the reality is most people feel like they've got their finger on the pulse of what is going on. 50% of people get their information in some format online, and that version can be through Twitter, through Facebook, through going online and looking at an online newspaper, watching online television shows, streaming services, whatever that is. These are not additive, by the way. 50% say that they get some version online. 25%, and this is a really high number, get their version of news from satire. This is Colbert, this is Saturday Night Live, this is all of these things. 71% of adults say that they still watch the local news or listen to the local news. So that's radio or television. What's interesting is when you look at it statistically, only 0.008% of American adults watch Fox News or MSNBC. Their impact is magnified well beyond their actual viewership, which is really interesting. And, you know, one of the things about the sort of loss of national news is what people are actually being exposed to. And so an example that I had that really surprised me, actually, I have a teenage daughter. She's a senior in high school, highly politically aware and active, and can tell you pretty much every shooting that takes place within the last, 90 days. Came to me yesterday and said, "Oh my God, did you know Kamala Harris had been nominated as the VP under Joe Biden?" Yeah, of course I knew. She's like, "I didn't know. How did you know?" And I realized that in her sort of universe of where she's getting her information, that hadn't been news. And Susie and I were talking about it. And Susie had a really interesting theory about why that is, why that blind spot could exist in somebody who considers themselves highly politically aware.
And a lot of this comes from, for a number of years before I was at the museum, I was at a nonprofit public narrative where we teach people about communication, and we also teach journalists, and we taught, it still goes, and it's a wonderful place. It teaches communications to nonprofits as well as communications and storytelling to journalists. And we started, in the middle of my tenure, we started pivoting more towards high schoolers, because we really thought that if we could get to these wonderful, amazing people who were in nonprofits earlier, how much it would help. And during the course of this as well, we began to, you know, people started talking about fake news. We know where that came from. That came from the president, but that became much more of a vernacular thing. And so we thought that it really was important to be pushing news and media literacy. So we would go in and talk to high school students, and we did a lot of high school workshops. And it was fascinating, because you would walk in there and pretty much everybody would tell you, you know, you'd have a room full of 30, 40 students, or maybe a room full of 12, or maybe a room full of 70. And they would say to you, I don't read the news. I don't read the news. I don't get the news. They tell you, and I know that this is probably your experience, they tell you that they're not consuming the news, but they're actually drowning in it. And some of it is that, you know, it used to be that we had much more formalized curators of our news. When we had newspapers, when we had radio only, we had the producers actually probably reading the newspapers off the on the radio. We had newspaper people who decided, again, I'm curating for you news, and it's important. This is on the front page. This is on page 2. This is on page 3. And again, we had curators in television, the producers, the news team. They're pushing what it is. Now we are the curators of news. We are the ones that curate news for one another. And part of it can be that maybe we're not responsible curators all the time. So the news that we are getting and that we are drowning in is filtered through specific lenses, and is also possibly, you know, this is why we get stories that are salacious. This is why we get the ability for, as we all have heard of, the Russians coming in and planting different stories to co-opt streams in social media. And this is why people are so used to that, because we're still in a kind of a generational mode where many of us still believe the curators have our best interest in mind. And sometimes the curators may have our best interest in mind, but they don't necessarily know how to decide what is really news versus what might be opinion. And so that's, again, where some of this really concentrates on. So we're going to move ahead, Carol. Carol, you're at the next slide about how we anchor this.
Right. And so, you know, as we were structuring this, one of the things that we really focused on was building materials that help teachers actually navigate by sort of disarming where students are going to start from, you know, and my running line is you are unlikely to encounter a high school student who has an opinion on Ross Perot, right? So one of the things about moving it back historically, that you remove the walls that students are going to have to looking at the interplay between performance by a candidate and interpretation by all of these other sources, so that they can start to recognize and see patterns, and then they become just more observant and more aware as they watch it take place in real time. So there are a bunch of things that we want to do. We want to frame how presidential debates were actually informed by the presence of television at all. You know, up until television, you know, you were reading their words. And then how the candidates were then informed by their performance and the public perception, and how commentary changed all of that. And the more real time that commentary, the more impactful it became. Susie, is there anything I missed on that slide?
No, I think that's about it, because we really did see when things started, it used to be just the debates or just the candidates, and there wasn't necessarily the analysis. Analysis then started after, and then now it's going on during, which is fascinating. We're all processing during it thanks to social media. So you can go ahead and you can ask me, Carol.
All right, so when was the first presidential debate on television?
I know. The first presidential debate on television was 1960, and it was between Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy, who was the young senator and the vice president. And I think what's really interesting is the question that always stumps most people, and a lot of people know that debate, and they've heard of it many times over. We've had many anniversaries of it. We at the museum are very proud to own what we call the camera that changed an election, because those who watched that election thought that Kennedy won. Those who listened to that election thought that Nixon won. So when I ask people the next question which is, when was the next debate? I'm usually, some people get it, but I'm usually met with a kind of a blank stare. Because there was a 16-year gap between the first presidential debate and the next presidential debate. I think that story in itself shows the real power of this medium, right? Nobody wanted to touch television. Nobody wanted to touch television. Nobody wanted to touch, let alone Richard Nixon when he was up for re-election. He did not want to try it again. He didn't want to be defeated. And so when you look at this 1976, what happens is it is Gerald Ford, who's the incumbent, and he is running against Carter. And as he's down in the polls, Gerald Ford is down in the polls, and he thought, okay, I can do this. I'm a politician. I can do this. So he studied very carefully in the same manner that JFK studied. He got playbooks from how he handled that, and he was ready. And so when these two men took the stage for that first debate, both of them were petrified. They did not want to look stupid, and they knew that the camera could do that. So this first debate goes along, and it's an hour and 20 minutes into this hour-and-a-half debate, and the sound goes off. The sound goes off. These two men, the sound was off for 27 minutes. And the two men, so afraid of looking stupid, not wanting to leave because the sound could come on, it could start again, they wouldn't be there, stood at the podium, just kind of gripping the podium. And so both of these gentlemen wanted nothing less than to look, they wanted to look presidential, and they didn't want to look stupid. But by standing there for 27 minutes and having the coverage going, okay, this is John, I'm outside, there are technical difficulties, we don't have any news from out here, we don't know what's going on. Hi, this is Henry, I'm inside, there are technical difficulties, we don't have any news here. It looked really, really ridiculous. And the overlay on this was, there was another disruptor that people hadn't thought about. Because the year beforehand, what we had was this little show called Saturday Night Live that had started. And so while both of the men looked a little lost and befuddled standing at the podium, the effect on Ford was a little bit more difficult, because for those of you who don't know, and those of you who may not remember, and those of you who do remember, one of the very first skits on Saturday Night Live was Chevy Chase doing his characterization of Gerald Ford was very inept. He would take a water glass and go right into his head. He would trip, he would fall. And so that sense of the candidate was also planted in a lot of people's heads. And so as they looked at this in those 27-minute gap, again, the brunt of the who is looking a little bit unprepared or more stupid than the rest, it really landed on the candidate because of what the media was up to, what the broadcast world was up to. So, so then we go into what I want to talk a little bit about what we cover. So we really looked at the key moments of disruption so that we can frame this. We really want to be able to talk politics without getting into political infighting. And politics can be analyzed really from a nonpartisan point of view, and that's what we're going for. So we're looking at we're looking at 9 moments of disruption. That's 8 debates, and then we call the gap one of those moments of disruption. And within this as well, we currently have up on the site greatdebates.org. That's greatdebates with an S.org. We also have 5 learning modules. And we're in the process of putting up 4 more. We wanted to make sure that things were current. And so we have COVID-19 in here. We have how that has affected the presidential debates. Doesn't look like we're really having them, does it? But we also have the influence of, we have history, the influence of 150 years of media. We have public opinion and social media. We have neutrality. The next modules will include, these are all, by the way, they are modules that overlay on top of the core curriculum. And the next ones that we have coming have to do with how the 3 branches of government, whether you're in the courts, whether you're in the presidential or the House of Representatives and the Senate, the congressional, there we go. They all handle broadcast in a very different way. So we'll have a module on that. We'll also have a module on mail-in voting and the history of that. And a couple, really we're talking about the media and disruption. We circled back to really define disruption in the next, and the panel that is coming after that, the module will be on race. Mm-hmm. So Carol,
right.
I'm moving to you too.
All right.
Well.
So on the site, you'll find full clips of the debates. In some of them, we also have highlights of the debates. There's also an analysis of those debates, those 8 debates, and then the gap. We have the 5 guides. They're downloadable. They're free. This is a resource for everybody. Built with the core curriculum, as Susy said. We actually hired academics who work in education and education training to write the debates under our guidelines. So they've been heavily vetted. And one of the things that we realized when we were going through some of the other materials that were available through some of the other sources is that there wasn't as much analysis available to teachers, that you could find raw content, but sort of pulling the why and the purpose out of it was much more difficult. And so we wanted to make sure when we built these that the contents, the outlines gave you an idea of this is the goal of this curriculum. This is what students will learn. This is how we think about it. This is why it is relevant and important. We give you the standards, and then we literally give you the breakdown of this is step 1, this is the materials you need so that you can do all that. Scalable deliverables from the students. Again, we know that some students are going to be able to write a paper. Some of them may be able to do a PowerPoint, whatever those things are, but that you can scale what students deliver back to you based on their technical savvy, their access, and their interest.
We did also want to have some really raw material, not raw, but kind of a little curated materials so that the students could actually search those. So we have a timeline as well, and it's 100 years of really the key points of when media iterated, when the world was disrupted, and how things affected in the presidential election. We are hoping, and we've always hoped and planned, that this curriculum is actually going to move on after the election to a point of talking about how the media have really influenced the president, the working president, throughout history. So that 100-year-old timeline was really kind of the bedrock for this whole multiple-year project that we're looking at. So I'm particularly excited about that.
So, when we started building this, one of the things that Susy and I did was we really looked at what are our areas of expertise and what are the things that we can do, that help sort of synthesize what is taking place. And so what we're going to do is now dissect sort of how we approach one of the modules so that you can start to understand the materials that you'll get and also the way you can work with students on this. And one of the things that we're, again, trying to do is create it in an objective environment. And again, the more backwards looking you can get in order to teach students to look at it analytically, the less likely they are to have sort of armor up around what it is you're saying, that then allow them to be more informed as they move into any sort of current affairs narrative that you want to cover.
And add one more thing to that, Carol. I just want to add one more thing. The other thing that we found is as well, because we knew that this election was going to be crazier than any that we've come across, or at least we all predicted that, right? But the craziness can be mitigated some way. Carol has pointed out very well that it's, the farther you go back in history, and students don't have a personal history with the moment, they get to learn and they ground, but they also are able to see moments where everybody is pontificating and saying, this is like no election we've ever been through, and actually see where those touchstones are to the past. And that actually grounds people in history and makes it more comfortable. I'm sorry to have interrupted you, Carol.
No, that was a really good point. So, this is an example that it was really interesting pulling this up. The Obama-Romney debate, which again feels like yesterday to me, and I realize is, half a lifetime ago for almost all of your students. There were two gaffes, as they were called, that Romney made. One was, when they were talking about the diversity of the talent that he would be able to bring into the White House, and he made reference to a binder full of women, which became a hashtag in early social media. And then the other was he talked about how we did not have as many ships as we'd had previously, and he wanted to lay that on Obama's doorstep. And Obama then responded with, "We have fewer horses and bayonets," the quote on the right. And you could start to see all of these memes pop up and all of these jokes pop up that amplified those comments. And this phenomenon gets ridden and augmented with every passing election. And it is interesting. And one of the things that we want students really looking at is, does a response on the internet over amplify it, or is it reflective of where the American public is? And there's real debate as to whether or not it leads or it follows as a harbinger of what people are responding to. And one of the things that we want students doing is looking back historically at it, and then looking at things as they occur in real time to recognize, where am I seeing this as a reflection of current voice, and where is this being magnified disproportionately because of who is writing it? But one of the things about the binder full of women that was really fascinating is, so when I wanted to pull some of the examples, people still use that hashtag. Like, it's just not dying. It's got an 8-year shelf life at this point. And it's really interesting to look historically back at that and recognize the legs on that sort of slam on Romney.
And so when you even look at those three debates, the first, the second, and the third, the very first one, the whole world, including Obama, assumed this would be his area and that he would shine. And indeed, he was incredibly wooden on it. And so he actually went and sequestered himself and trained and trained and trained. The second one that came up in the election, when we started into the binder full of women hashtag, Obama was up in the polls. He'd gotten a bounce, and he was feeling, quite like he had his pepper. And at that point, Obama's team was also ready, as it had not been the first one, to be much more aggressive on social media. And the binders full of women stuff, I mean, that didn't just necessarily happen by accident. They responded, they were ready to get
fueled and fed. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As was the bayonets and horses, which was fun.
All right, so one of the things that we want to pick apart, because we think that this is very resonant with high school students, less so I think with junior high, but really with high school students and clearly with college students, is looking at the weave and the interplay between late night comedy and politics. And it's a fascinating thing that actually has been not studied enough by the academic world to really look at the sort of strength of the influence and the interplay between the two. It's one of the things that the museum will focus on heavily as we build out some of the content over the course of the next couple of years, because there is the boundaries between what was news and what is comedy are gone. And it's fascinating to look at what the ramifications are of that. So one of the first things we want to look at is politicians on television. We think that this is this is a new phenomenon, right? It starts with Clinton playing the sax on the Arsenio Hall show. And in fact, this clip isn't even the first. So Susie, you want to talk a little bit about some of the earlier lead-ins to candidates using media to influence their public opinion?
Yeah, we do. We always, and we know this. We always think that whatever era we're in, it's all new, and of course it isn't. As we have said that while while the broadcast media has really disrupted the elections, candidates have also jumped on them. They may be a little slow, and there may be problems, and there may be growth during the but they utilize what's in there. You're think about Roosevelt and the fireside chats, using the radio to really connect with people. Here was an incredibly wealthy man who was definitely part of the 1%, but by sitting here talking to people on a regular basis on the radio, it felt like he was their friend and neighbor in their home, living the same thing they were living. And then we look at Eisenhower. When Eisenhower came along, he was wooed to run, and it was a kind of a reluctant one. And they actually went to the advertising industry to put out the first commercials, little cartoons with "I like Ike," elephants on back of carrying signs of "I like Ike," Ike and the donkeys being pushed away. He was chastised for actually going to that dirty, horrible advertising world, but it was very successful, and people kept saying, "I like Ike." Kennedy was great. He had Sinatra singing "We'll Back Jack," and that actually became a very popular song. So there has been all of these things that candidates have actually used to groom their image. You want to show this, Carol?
Yeah, so we're only going to play just a tiny little bit of this clip, but it was fascinating to watch this transpire.
I would like you now to give a real tonight welcome to Senator from Massachusetts, Mr. John Kennedy. You would be if I could, because if you make it, it would be nice for my daughter to know that.
This isn't translating as well on this end, Carol, but we stopped. Jack Parr basically said, "Can I call you John?" And he said, "Because if you win the election, I want to be able to tell my daughter that we're on a first name basis." So we do know from many Zoom meetings that sometimes the videos don't always come through as well. But here we are, in grooming.
Right. So, one of the things, again, everybody, historically who's aware of sort of where the debate started, recognize that shift with the Kennedy-Nixon debate. This is a cover from 1968 with Esquire that says, "Nixon's last chance, this time he better look right." And it talks about his having to navigate television. He goes on to Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, and for those of you who are not ancient like I am, it was a comedy sketch show that had a regular routine where one of the characters would say, "Sock it to me," and usually get a bucket of water dumped on them, or get hit with a pie or something like that. It was a standard catchphrase, and his team had him go on Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In and say, "Sock it to me," specifically to help humanize him. He, of course, did not let anybody hit him with anything. There is no water, there's no pie. But it was a way of him demonstrating that he was willing to sort of take it on the chin and move into the comedy era in order to be a more identifiable candidate. Is there anything you want to add to that?
I was just say Gerald Ford also had the last laugh on SNL because he was the first president to go on SNL. And had a great experience on it. And as we know, it has now become a standard bearer that almost any candidate has to get on SNL or has to be caricatured by it. And it's a fascinating debate to think of, is this again influencing, or is this just really reflecting and mirroring back the images of these candidates that we're all seeing? So I love that area to plumb in discussion, and this is a perfect example.
Right, and so again, one of the things that's really interesting when you start to look at the influence of social media, and presidential candidates are the debates that Gore and Bush go through together. And again, this gets into does SNL shape the way people see candidates, or is it funny because it is reflective of how the public sees candidates? And so you have on both ends, Bush and Gore get skewered in the way they're portrayed on Saturday Night Live. And we're going to try one clip. If this doesn't work, then I can just walk you through it. This is Will Ferrell as George Bush during the first debate. Maybe. And we wait.
I can.
All right. I think
can give you
it's going to play.
When he is asked.
Governor Bush, this question is for you, and it concerns foreign policy. Last week in Serbian elections, we saw the apparent defeat of President Slobodan Milosevic by challenger Vojislav Kostunica, yet Milosevic refused to step aside. As president, would you apply pressure on Milosevic and openly aid Kostunica and his Novija Srpskaya party, or by working with neighbors such as Karadan Dragaljevic of Croatia, Istvan Pojani of Hungary, or Antipas Lageros of Greece?
First of all, I think that any instability in that first country you mentioned is troubling. And clearly the second guy you spoke of beat the first guy. Personally, I favor seeking the diplomatic help of the person I call guy number 3.
All right, so you get the idea. What, all right, let's see, can I move to the next slide? Hold. There. So what's fascinating about that is that both candidates are sat down by their teams after that Saturday Night skit, and they are made to watch it. Gore and Bush, because their team recognizes the fact that they are, in fact, being seen by the public like this. That although Saturday Night Live may amplify it, the reality was Bush was seen as uninformed and Gore was seen as snobby and dismissive and huffy, and they were both coached in how to navigate it. And this is just a small highlight then of this second debate, and you can see Bush's preparation.
Into the area of our military power. Governor, new question. Should the fall of Milosevic be seen as a triumph for U.S. military intervention? I think it's a triumph. I thought that the president made the right decision in joining NATO and bombing Serbia. I supported him when they did so. I called upon the Congress not to hamstring the administration in terms of forcing troop withdrawals on a timetable that wasn't in necessarily our best interest or fit our nation's strategy. And so I think it's good public policy. I think it worked, and I'm pleased I made the decision I made. I'm pleased the president made the decision he made. And do you think that Milosevic would not have fallen if the United States and NATO had not intervened?
All right. So one of the things in looking at this way is the benefit of using this for students is that we're using tools they understand, we're using voices they understand, voices they watch, voices they may experience, and we're helping them see the historical grounding of where that feedback loop takes place, so that in real time, one of the things that they can watch is they can watch performance, and they can also watch the interpretation. They can watch the way the cultural voices respond to things that are happening, and they can start to be more discerning of that, so that they're not as easily led by what may or may not be reality. And they can also look at where things are exaggerated or amplified in a way that does not work in terms of fitting with what their expectations are for the elections. So with that, the last real thing that we want to talk about before we move into questions is helping them navigate social media, because social media is just riddled with the ability to be misinformed, to lose your way in terms of what the realities are of what's being posted. And we want to make sure that students, particularly now, as they're becoming more media literate, understand the sort of phenomena that take place, and they're able to navigate that.
And we want to be also very careful. Social media is a tool. And so when we demonize it, we're demonizing a tool that actually can be very, very helpful. Throughout my career as a journalist, we've used social media interact. When I was at the Sun Times, we reached out to people to get questions. That was when we had websites with question boards. That was the very first iteration. And when I was running a newspaper in Kankakee, we actually used social media all night to, during a snowstorm, we stayed up all night, about 4 of us, to get people hooked up with where they had been stranded with the police. There are valuable things, and with students, I have used social media to actually get them in touch with key names and people who they never would have been able to meet. We wouldn't have been able to get them in the classroom, but they've been able to connect with them on social media in really advantageous ways. So it is a tool like any other tool, and it has to be used in a deliberate fashion. And I think I did spend a little while at Public Narrative teaching teachers a little bit about how to utilize social media in a way that can be advantageous. And there are just great ways that we think that these students can connect as well. And so I think we're moving a little bit behind. So I want to go faster here with the last one so that we can get to questions. So as we move beyond the great debates, we want the museum to actually be, its whole goal right now to exist is to be an educational tool for you all as well as for lifelong learners, because we find that, even when we get to be adults, we still enjoy learning. But education is our thrust. So as we go into this, we have a wonderful archives that we are organizing in a way that will be geared more towards education. If you need something, call me, talk to me. I'll make sure that you have my phone number and everything. We'll try to find things we haven't. We've actually looked at this as a museum in such a fulsome way. I don't think that story has ever really been told well enough. We have a 4-part encyclopedia on television. We have a 3-part encyclopedia on advertising. And I think I can't remember if it's 4 parts or 3 parts or 5 parts, encyclopedia on radio. And those are great tools. These are online, some of the things you can search for with us, as well as we worked with an organization to actually bring to life some of that encyclopedia with interviews. So those are 2 things. And Carol, I think you were going to talk about some of the other museums out there as well as yours, right?
Right. So, one of the things that we want to make sure that you are all aware of is that a lot of museums actually offer curriculum materials and extensive online archives that you can use within the classroom. My museum, the History Center, actually has an entire roster that is on understanding community, how community forms, immigration, everything from, middle school, sort of understanding how communities form and why they form, where they form, to high schoolers learning how to create their own walking tour by understanding how to create maps, how to do research, how to use primary documents. JFK Library has some really nice curriculum. Facing History will be able to post this as well. You'll get this deck afterwards so that you're able to go check out these references on your own afterwards. All right, so we have a question.
Just so you know, we also incorporate in our, we are happy to promote others, happy to stand on the shoulders of all sorts of other people. And so we incorporate a lot of the techniques, news literacy techniques, media literacy techniques from Stony Brook University, which is open source, as well as from the News Literacy Project. So we're, we're augmenting what we're doing with others and promoting them as well. So we have, let me see what I got here. I got a question here. I got to take off my glasses. With a pivot to remote learning, students are being asked to become digitally literate at younger and younger ages. Oh my gosh, yes. And are thus exposed to this type of online news and media as well. How can we frame and teach media literacy and education for younger students as well? That's a tricky one. And I know that I have been brought into elementary school classes to talk about media literacy during different discussions and stuff. And it becomes very, 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 very difficult. But I always try to ground things again, as we've framed this, with historical references. Actually bring a can and a string and have students talk through the can so that they can see that. I understand that that's not something you can do physically, but you can have them do that as a project to talk with their sister or brother in one other room. How is it we connect with one another? How do we communicate? We communicate through words, and we communicate through social media. And so it's a basic form and tool for communications that's not always used in the way that we want it to be used. So I've got a lot of theories on this. I've got a lot of exercises and practice that we've used with high school kids and that we've used with preteens and younger students to look at how we tell stories on social media and how we make sure that those stories are actually grounded in facts.
So that's actually, so the one thing that we have done at the History Center that ties to that is teaching students how to vet primary sources, helping them understand what where the information is coming from and how to do a quick validation of that. And one of the things that's really important, and one of the materials that we provide to our regional students, is links to various newspapers. So what they can do is they can do a compare and contrast. They can actually see how two different organizations have talked about it, and then they start to look at why is it spoken about this way. We have a really interesting one where we actually look at how Rockefeller was reviewed by two different journals. One basically lauding him for being a philanthropist, and the other talking about what a horrible human being he was. And part of the exercise in the curriculum is having students think about, why would you have one opinion here and another opinion there? And that goes as young as 6th grade. Elementary school, we try to be a little more gentle with what it is they're looking at. But again, it's still helping them understand, looking at the documents and looking at trusted sources. It's helping them identify what is a trusted source.
And I see that Jenna just put up Common Sense Media. That's a great tool. But again, Stony Brook has some curriculum, as does the News Literacy Project, they're helpful to that. And also, please feel free. This is my email right here. My telephone number is 630-747-6144. That's my cell phone. You're always welcome to give me a call. We'd be available to help you with anything that you're doing, to discuss it. We want to be a resource for you. That is our goal in really becoming and planting our flag and being an educational institution. So, and if I don't have an answer for something, I will make sure that I get you the right people who do. That's what we're there for. What other questions do you have? We'd love to hear from you. And we'd love to see what you think of this. Do you think that, and maybe you can write this in the comments, do you think that this seems like a doable way to teach your students? Do you think that this is a way that will help you wade through some of the political morass? What we really wanted to do with this, and we're still looking to see if we can, none of us expected the pandemic, right? We're still looking to see if we can find a little funding for this, but we wanted to also try to put together a newsletter grounded with the same philosophy of finding historical moments, etc., that you would get on almost a weekly or bi-weekly basis during this election cycle and up through. We know that there's going to be more than just after the November election. We know it's going to take more time to count things. And we also know that there's going to be back and forth on a bunch of things after the vote is counted and all the way through to the inaugural. So that's where we thought that this could go through at least and plant a flag in. And if those are things that you're interested in, and if you need resources, we're going to be sending out, Jenna is going to be sending out just a quick evaluation, like, 4 questions at most. And what we would love you to do is give us your email so that we can send you updates, and we can put you on a specific teacher-only list that we do. And we will again be reiterating this website on an almost weekly basis to make sure that it reflects what's going on. So, and our hope is as well that we will have some virtual places for you to come, as Jenna mentioned, maybe talking to reporters who are covering the election, bringing your students to something like that, maybe talking to some of the academics. We want to be responsive to what your needs are. And as I have said, we do know this election will proceed in a way that none of us can predict. So we want to be available to bring you resources if there is a particularly difficult moment and you need them. So please, again, take my phone number and be ready.
All right. So I think that takes us up to the end of this session. Jenna?
That was awesome. Thank you so much. It was both informative and a little levity with the SNL clip. So I appreciated that. I was chuckling along as Will Ferrell was doing his bit. So thank you. I always love those. I am putting in the chat window right now a few different links here. So the first one is obtaining your PDH for today. So ISB does require live attendance, so you only get that PDH if you were with us live today. So lucky you guys. Go ahead, click that link and do the little back and forth on the Google form there. The next one is our Wednesday webinar page of our website. That's where you will find this recording of this webinar, where you can send your colleagues to look at it as well. But it will live there in infamy. It will also be on our YouTube page. And then obviously, as we said earlier, I will send it to all of you as well as the slide deck and that little questionnaire survey that Susie mentioned, and any other resources. I know they've got a bunch of links in the slide deck, so you'll be wanting to dig into that. And then the last thing is our, if you want to register for other upcoming webinars that we have, if you want to register for any of our workshops, check out that calendar link as well. There's lots of good information there, lots of new events that we're doing for you guys to get those PDHs as well. And then last but not least, Susie and I both mentioned that our desire to have that virtual field trip for your students, to talk with reporters, to talk with politicos, you know, people who are in the field. And so as soon as we nail down the details on that, we're looking at early to mid-October, and we'll probably do more than one. So we'll get you some details on that, and hopefully you guys can join us and bring your students virtually along as well.
Jenna,
So
if anybody has ideas about who they'd like to see, please do send me a note, okay?
I gave them my idea yesterday, so that'll be for another time. But so Susie, Carol, thank you so very much. Everybody, thank you for joining us today. We hope you appreciated this, and glad that we can bring these kind of things to you as often as we can. So thank you, Susie, Carol. I will be chatting with you guys. I will look for that email from you, Susie, with that Google form and anything else you guys want to share. And then I will be chatting with you guys, like I said, either later this week or early next week about working out the details on our other fun activity. So thanks so much.
Thank you. And again, we hope you found it valuable.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. If you have any questions, I'll hang out for another minute or two. Otherwise, go ahead and clock yourself out and go have a good rest of your day. So thanks.
It's like, I'm not sure whether to leave or not.
I think we're good, so you guys can probably clock out. Thank you so much, and shoot me that stuff over, you know, via email, and then let's set up a time to discuss the other stuff as well. So
Thanks. See you in a minute.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.